everybody. So today we will be talking about the planet Saturn. I wanted to do a video on Saturn because it's Saturn, well, usually at the forefront of my mind as it is. It's come up a lot recently. I've had a lot of people ask me the question of why I named my business Saturn Season Astrology, why I would name my business that. Recently, when I've had clients, over the past month and a half, I'd say, clients that have reached out for readings, whether that be natal chart readings, solar arc readings, transit readings, solar return readings, whatever, Saturn has been a major focus for them. And this isn't even me, bringing Saturn up in the reading. This has been them asking me specifically to tell them about Saturn in their natal chart or in transit or whatever. You know, when I read for people, I'll always, when they first reach out, I'll always ask, is there something that you want me to focus on in the reading? Is there something that you would like me, is there a planet or planets that you want me to really focus on? Are there aspects that you want me to zone in on? Are, whatever, areas of life, whatever. Because I'm not a mind reader. So if, there's something that you're really hoping that I touch on, I like to know that. So I'll touch on it. But recently, when I've asked that question, Saturn has been what has come up over the past month and a half. Tell me about Saturn. Please tell me about Saturn in my chart. How can I work with Saturn? Why is Saturn such a pain in the ass in my chart? People have said this. Or something kind of like that. I had one person that did ask, why is Saturn such a pain in the ass in my chart? Which I laugh because, I get it. I get why that question would be asked. Because Saturn can be incredibly challenging. And not only that, I've had people actually tell me that they wanted that before I even had a chance to ask that question. So Saturn has been very much very, very important within the readings that I've done over the past month and a half. And I'll always bring Saturn, I always look at Saturn in a natal chart reading or in whatever kind of a reading. But I might not always focus on it. These people wanted to focus on Saturn. So I'm okay, so Saturn is very front and center right now. I also personally have a transit Saturn squaring my ascendant and squaring my natal Saturn. So, in a whole other way, it's very front and center for me too. So there's that. The question of why I named my business Saturn Season Astrology has come up as well. Why would you name your business that? Well, to answer that question, for anybody that's curious, I named my business Saturn Season Astrology because, like I just mentioned, with transit Saturn squaring my ascendant and my natal Saturn, I have natal Saturn conjunct my ascendant in Sagittarius. So Saturn is a planet that I feel like I am intimately familiar with. With the energy, with the way he works. I feel very Saturnian myself. Deep in my bones, in my soul, I feel Saturn's influence in my life, very, very much so. Also, my moon is in Capricorn, so I've got a Saturn-ruled moon. So there's that too. I do feel like I am a very Saturnian person. Also, the initials for Saturn Season Astrology, SSA, they are the same initials as my son. He has the same initials, SSA. Also, a 16-degree Capricorn moon like me. So, it just felt right. I remember when I played around with the name for my business back in 2018. God, I can't believe it's already 2024. I'm damn. It's been almost 6 years. But when I was playing around with names, I played around with a bunch of them because I remember thinking, God, if I name my business Saturn Season Astrology, people, because of the association that people have with Saturn, they're going to associate my business with, I don't know. There was a sense of concern or worry or should I do this? Should I name it that? But nothing else felt right. That was the only one that felt and I played around with a bunch of names. but that one just felt right, and it has continued to feel right. So I'm glad that I did it. Even though I was concerned that people would be put off by Saturn in the name. And you know, that's kind of part of what this video is. You know, this video, in a sense, is kind of like a love letter to Saturn, in a way. Kind of. Because I really do feel like there is so much positive about Saturn that does get overlooked, or that is not talked about nearly as much as the challenging stuff or the negative stuff. Those things tend to get talked about so much more frequently. And they're not wrong. Like, there is a lot of there is challenging stuff with Saturn. Absolutely. But there's also challenging stuff with all the planets, with all of the signs. Not just Saturn. You know, I think a reason, you know, Saturn is one of the malefics, like Mars. Mars is another one that I think tends to get talked about more in a more challenging way, or more negatively. And I think it's because both of them are the malefics. I gotta be honest, I don't even fucking like that term. I don't even fucking like that term. Outside of event charts or horary, or like the crime charts, missing people, I think for that type of stuff, I can see the merit in maybe thinking of certain planets as more challenging and certain planets as more easy, or malefic and benefic. But in a natal chart, nah. I don't like that term. I think it's antiquated. I think the term malefic and benefic, I think they're antiquated terms. And I think they tend to frame, when you're learning astrology, they tend to frame like Jupiter and Venus good, Saturn and Mars bad. I think that can happen. That's not universal. That's not going to happen for everybody, but I think that it can happen just by virtue of hearing that Mars and Saturn are malefics and Jupiter and Venus are benefics. I'll just throw this out there. I have seen Jupiter and Venus do some really fucked shit in people's charts. I would not have considered these particular Venus and Jupiters to be benefic. So, you know, but that doesn't get talked about. The shadowy sides of the planets that are generally thought of as good. And this video is not to rag on Jupiter and Venus, but it is, my point is, we just tend to make these associations. I think people that are interested in astrology, making these associations between certain planets being good, certain planets being bad. I think it impedes learning. Personally, I think it does. And sorry, I'm getting my drink. My throat's kind of weird today. I think it can cause problems with learning and making these associations for things that just aren't. Everything has a light. Everything has a shadow. All the planets have a light or a higher vibrational way of expressing themselves. They have a lower vibrational way of expressing themselves too. Same with the signs, you know. So yeah. So this video is going to deal more with the positive with the positive expressions of Saturn, or as I like to call him, Big Daddy Dick, or Big Dick Daddy. Both he and Pluto, I do think of this way. And sometimes that can be, you know, not so easy sometimes, but sometimes that can be a good thing. So sometimes it can be, especially when a person embraces that energy and they haven't before or something. That's amazing. That's amazing for a person. And that is something that you can embrace through Saturn. Same thing with Pluto, right? That's an amazing manifestation of that energy. But, okay, so planets are, just to throw this out there first, planets are what energy is wanting to be expressed, needing to be expressed, should be expressed, whatever the case might be. Signs are how energy is expressed, and the houses are where or areas of life that energy is expressed through. So Saturn is a planet. Saturn is a what? Saturn is what energy is needed to be expressed. So we all know that, the more challenging manifestations of Saturn, the boundaries, the limitations, the isolation, the restrictions, yes, okay, we're all familiar with that. We're all familiar with that. But let's talk about the more positive ways that Saturn can, the higher vibrational things, the things that are really good about Saturn. 1, mastery. Saturn in a chart can show, I believe, where mastery and how mastery, where by house and how by sign, where mastery can be expressed, or should be expressed, or needs to be expressed, where mastery can be found, what kind of mastery is needed, where you can be a master. So, okay, let's say you got Saturn in the first house. Self-mastery. First house is the house of the self. Among other things, we'll just go with self-mastery here. Saturn in the second house. You could be looking at mastery over resources, mastery over money, mastery over values, mastery over security, stability, thriving, not just surviving, but thriving. A master of all of those things. That expresses itself in whatever, sign it happens to be in, through that way, through that sign's energy. So, look at where Saturn falls in your chart. And think about Saturn in terms of mastery or mastering. I think there is something there about that is definitely something that when I'm going to talk to somebody about Saturn in their chart, this does come up, because Saturn is the master. Saturn is the master, and I'd even add on Saturn is the master of reality. So it's almost like where Saturn falls in the chart by sign and house, not only is it where one can have mastery and one can be a master, but one can also be a master of their reality. I really do. I've seen it not only in my own life, but in the lives of friends, the lives of family, the lives of clients. This is a thing. And this is a very positive way to tap into Saturn, a very positive way to work with Saturn. Now, of course, you want to take into account, what sign we're talking about. Obviously, the house, like what I'm talking about, the aspects that it makes. Obviously, all of these things need to be taken into consideration. Also, what houses, because I use both rulerships. I use traditional and modern. So Saturn would be the ruler of Capricorn and of Aquarius. Uranus also rules Aquarius, because like I said, I use both rulerships. But I when I'm looking at Saturn, I also like to look to see, what house has Aquarius on the cusp and Capricorn on the cusp, because those houses will then flow into Saturn in whatever house Saturn is in, also flavoring that Saturn too. So you want to take everything into consideration when you're reading, but that mastery thing, being the master, or even the master of reality, of your reality. This is a thing. I really do believe it is a thing. I've seen it, like I said, I've seen it play out that way. I do think it is a thing. I think Saturn is also where Saturn falls in the chart and how by sign. I think Saturn can show where one is responsible. Now, some people are like, responsibility, that sounds like that sucks. Which, okay, I myself, with Saturn conjunct the Ascendant, have a very strange relationship with responsibility. I don't like to take on a lot of responsibility, because when I take on responsibility, I really take it on, and I take it very seriously. And it can be very, it can be tiring to do that. So when I take on responsibility, like, I'm very careful with the responsibility that I do take on, for that reason. The different responsibilities in life. And there are some that I might outright pass on because I'm like, nope, I already have enough responsibilities. I don't want that one too. So I do think, and in that way, Saturn's actually been good in terms of limitations. I've been able to, and boundaries, I've been able to kind of be like, nope, I don't want that responsibility. I might be limiting myself in some way, but I don't want that responsibility. So that's been actually a positive manifestation of boundaries and limitations when we tend to think of those along with Saturn in a more challenging way, right? That's actually been a positive manifestation of it. But responsibility is something that Saturn wants to express, needs to express, should express. Where Saturn falls in the chart can show, where or areas of life that responsibility comes through. How by sign. So, let's say you've got Saturn in the 11th house. Perhaps a person has a responsibility to their long-term goals. Perhaps they have, their long-term goals, hopes, and wishes. Let's say they have a responsibility to groups of people or to their friends. Sometimes that's, perhaps it's a responsibility to, let's say Saturn is in Leo in the 11th house. Perhaps this is a responsibility for the person to be an individual in groups, right? Or something like that. To creatively express themselves in groups. It depends on the chart, but you will find, I think, wherever Saturn falls, there is a sense of responsibility that does exist. That it is, and I do think that it is necessary to understand where and how that responsibility, comes out. So I do think that and I think that is a positive. I really do. I mean, I think that is a responsibility, taking responsibility, being responsible. There's, like I said, responsibilities can feel like weights, right? They can, but I think that it is important to know where responsibility is and how to express it, or how it wants to express itself, or what have you. Saturn is also excellence. So where Saturn falls in the chart and how by sign could show where and how excellence comes out, where one finds excellence, where one needs excellence, needs to express excellence. Let's say Saturn in the 7th house, this person needs to express excellence in relationships or through relationships, something like that. It could even be that their relationship needs to be that of excellence. Go a lot of different ways. It would depend on the whole chart. I'm not looking at an actual chart here. So, but just playing around with some ideas about how that could go. But excellence is another thing that, Saturn could definitely want to express. Authority. Now, when we think of Saturnian authority, we tend to think of like ruling with an iron fist kind of thing. It certainly could be, but I also feel like, and it does depend on the chart, but I feel like self-authority can be in there too. In fact, I often think it is. So it might be like, where Saturn falls in the chart by house and how by sign might show, where and how one's self-authority comes through, how and where one wields that kind of thing. But I mean, it can also be the ruling with an iron fist kind of authority too. Certainly could be. But I do think self-authority can definitely play in here as well. Saturn is also building. Saturn is the builder. So wherever Saturn falls in the chart, I feel like building something It might be something that needs to come through, like, I don't know, use first house, building of the self. If you got Saturn in the first house, building of self in some way. Saturn in the 10th house, building and career, building in the public spheres of life, or building through those. Saturn in the 9th house, building through knowledge, building through higher education, you know. Of course, all of these, not just these examples from, you know, the building part, but all, you know, Saturn could be more challenging, right? Like Saturn in the 9th house could also point towards, right, if you wanted to, because these things do have a light and a shadow. Saturn in the 9th house could also point towards, you know, the person feeling limited in their, say, higher education or abstract thinking, or their, you know what I mean, or in their understanding of things. So it might be really important that that person build those up, right? Taking that limitation that Saturn can express and looking at it in a more positive way, or taking it and being like, no, this isn't going to limit me. I'm going to build on this shit. Seriously. Because Saturn also tests. Saturn is a tester. And he tests. And I do think that there are so many rewards that can come when we rise up to that test. I really do think that there are. You know, because people like, you know, Saturn limitations, boundaries, restrictions, isolation, all of these things absolutely can feel that way. I am not dismissing anybody that feels like they've got a real challenging Saturn in their chart. I'm not trying to dismiss it or say that would be like, oh no, it's no big deal, because I know that Saturn can feel that way and can function that way. Absolutely. But I also think, and this is something that not everybody's going to agree with me about, and that's okay. Again, I'm not going to argue. Like in other videos I've said, I'm not going to argue about stuff. I'll have a discussion, but I'm not going to argue. But I do think that Saturn wants people to break through those limitations and restrictions. I really, really do. And I think that's what the testing is. You're tested through your natal chart. You're tested through transits. You're tested through, you know, all of these ways in astrology through Saturn. And I do think that Saturn will test you to see if you can break through the boundaries, the limitations, the restrictions, the isolation, etc., that you might feel from the influence. There's a maturing that also comes with this. Not folding to the pressure, not folding. I do, and that might sound like overly positive and overly easy, and there's nothing easy about it. You know, if you're feeling limited or restricted or isolated, or like you've got boundaries up all around you can't break through them, you know, that can feel incredibly defeating. Absolutely. But I do think that Saturn is the kind of planet, because Saturn perseveres. That's another thing Saturn wants to express, perseverance. And I do think that there is a reward for persevering through, breaking through any boundaries, limitations, restrictions, isolation that one might feel they have in their chart. That person's like over there talking. I don't know what they're... Okay. I do think that there is a reward for breaking through the boundaries and things like that you might feel exist by Saturn in your chart, persevering through them, breaking through them. And I do think that that is what Saturn ultimately wants. Another thing that Saturn represents is glue, the gluing, cement, this sort of thing. And I do think that Saturn in a chart can point to a place in the chart where when everything feels like it's fucking falling apart. And I know most people have been there. If you've never been there, you're watching this and you're like, I don't know what that feels like. Lucky you. I'm happy for you. But I do truly happy for you, because that shit sucks when you feel like that. But but I think most people watching this know what I'm talking about when they feel like everything is just falling apart around them. Saturn can be a place, I think, where you can hold it together. Because Saturn is like a cement. Saturn is like a glue. Let's say you've got Saturn in let's just use the third house for an example. Saturn in the third house. Everything might be falling apart around somebody, around you. But your mind. You keep your mind together. Your mind, third house being the mind. You keep your mind together. It's like the glue. It's like the cement. It keeps you going. Or third house, we could be talking about, even siblings. Third house has, there's a sibling tie there. It could be that, your siblings help you keep it together. Your aunts and uncles help you keep it together. It could be that communication helps you keep it together. Learning something new or whatever helps you keep it together. Wherever Saturn falls in the chart, though, it does function like a glue. Even if it's, because I know that I'm thinking of a few charts where Saturn is there are challenging things with Saturn, and it might not feel like that is the case. But I really do think, and not that I want anybody's life to fall apart or feel like it's falling apart, but if you should find yourself in that place where everything around you is falling apart, I really can't stress enough to look into where Saturn falls in your chart, what it's doing, because I do feel like it is a place in the chart where you are able to keep it together. And that can be incredibly helpful to feel like you can keep something together when everything else around you is falling apart. That can be very helpful. Another example, maybe you've got Saturn in the sixth house. Maybe when everything else around you is falling apart, you keep it together by the glue for you is like your routine. Maybe the glue for you is keeping yourself physically and mentally healthy. Maybe the glue for you is work. Maybe it's, that helps you keep things together. Everything else might be falling apart, but you having work to do helps. Definitely, I think looking at Saturn from this, and that is something that I don't really see talked about. So I would definitely look at your chart and think about it in this way. Think about Saturn in this way. Now, one of the reasons, like the Saturn return, right? Saturn return is when natal Saturn and transit Saturn when transit Saturn comes back to natal Saturn to the same degree, minutes, seconds. But when I look at Saturn returns, I look at an orb of 5 degrees applying and separating. It's usually about a year. Saturn returns usually about a year. Give or take, usually about a year. And during the Saturn return, which happens roughly every 29 years, it can, that's the one time that Saturn may not function in that glue type of way, and it's because Saturn is coming around to mature that gluing that is there. Saturn returns mature. So that is like the one time that I might think of Saturn perhaps not functioning quite as much like the glue and the cement and keeping things together as I might think of it in other times in one's life. Saturn returns, like I said, they're about a year, every 29 years. So it's not like you have those all the time. But when those happen, Saturn might not feel quite so much like a glue because that glue that is there is maturing or is being pulled up to be reglued in a different way, maybe in the same way, maybe it just needs some new glue, whatever the case might be. But those particular times when that happens, that Saturn can feel not like a glue. But other than that, other than those times, I do feel like Saturn is like a glue that one has a cement, something to help somebody feel together. Anyway, I might have more to say about this at some point because I could talk about Saturn for a while. If you want me to read for you, read Saturn in your chart or read anything, let me know. You can reach out through email at ellie@saturnseason.com or saturnseason@gmail.com. I'll also put the link in the description box below where you can get a reading from me. I would love to talk about Saturn. I could talk about Saturn for a long time or anything. I mean, like any planet, whatever. I did show the star card for Saturn. I will also put the link where these can be checked out, looked at, purchased, whatever, in the description box below. They really are an awesome astrological learning tool. So I do suggest that you do that if you have not yet. And if you feel like sharing below where Saturn falls in your chart, whatever, I would love to read it. I was going to say hear it, but I'm not going to hear anything, but I could read it. So yeah, I love talking to y'all. So if you feel like doing that, let me know. And I will see you all later.